Okay, so we're going to be going over the triangulation method of drawing. This is a 2D approach, which means we're going to be basically pretending that whatever we're drawing, whether it's 3D or not, is a flat surface. So we're going to be making a lot of point comparisons across the form from one side to the other. So there's not much of a sense of volume to it in the beginning, and it's a very abstract start to this drawing process. But basically, how we start this is we assign a point to the outside, some extreme part of your subject matter. In this case, we're going to use the left top edge of the ankle here. And what we're going to try to do first is get an envelope. And an envelope is basically like a footprint of the entire subject matter. It's like a 5 or 6 sided polygon that will represent the bounding box of whatever we're drawing within it. So in this case, we're starting with that angle, or with that point on the top left corner of the ankle, and we're going to draw a line straight down to the next farthest left part of our subject, which is that bottom point there. From there, we're going to then take another angle measurement from that's going to describe basically the ground plane of that platform or that pedestal that the foot is sitting on. Once we have these two angles and these 2 points down, we haven't really established any scale until we put our third point down. And how we find that third point is by triangulating from our first point. So we have that first point on the top left of the ankle, the second point is on the bottom left of the pedestal. And then to find that third point, all we're going to do is take a measure from our first point to that kind of corner there of the pedestal. And to do that, again, we're going to measure our angle with our pencil and see where those two angles intersect. Where those angles intersect is going to be where our third point is. And once we put that third point in, we've basically established the scale of our drawing. So that angle that we take from our first point to our third point, that is something we call a construction line. All of our lines in the preliminary stages of a block-in or an envelope are going to be construction lines. But when I am drawing through the form like that, or I'm just using these angles purely to triangulate, I typically draw them even lighter than I would if I know it's going to be a line that exists in the end of the drawing. So here again, now that we have 3 points, then we can all of a sudden check our fourth point from 2 different spots. So the more points we have, the more options for checking our work is. And it's important to always check your work. I like to think of it as like a math equation. When you think you've solved for x, you plug that number back into the equation and make sure everything zeroes out. So this is that same process. You shouldn't move forward until you've checked your answer and make sure that it makes sense with everything else. So here you can see that angle there is actually a really nice angle to summarize the overall tilt of the foot there. It actually intersects with the outside, the contour of the right side of the foot in several different places, which is nice. But also note that I'm not getting into too much of the detail there. I'm just looking for our biggest, most general shapes first, because this is our envelope. What we want with our envelope is the biggest picture information as possible. So again, every angle and point and intersection that I make here, I'm cross-referencing it with all the rest of them. getting the envelope at this stage really accurate is really important, and it's one of the harder parts of the drawing process because these points are so far away from each other. But it's crucial that we get all of these in proportion and relating to each other early on so that our drawing is built from a strong foundation. Once we're at about this stage, this is basically the envelope is done now. I've closed off that shape and I know the rest of my drawing is going to exist within that shape, within that envelope. So here it is without the reference underneath it. It's pretty abstract, and when you're drawing this out, it is kind of hard to know in these early stages if it's accurate or not, but as long as you're being careful about taking your measurements correctly and measuring your angles and getting those points in the right spots so that all of those anchor points are relating to each other, then it's safe to move forward even with such an abstract drawing in the beginning. From here, the next question we ask ourselves is basically what's the next biggest shape that we can carve out? So think of it as carving marble. You're going to start to chip away the biggest pieces into the smallest pieces and smaller and start refining into the details. So the same idea is in effect here with the drawing process as far as triangulating points. We're just slowly chipping away at the next biggest bits of information so that we can get them out of the way and start to refine the drawing. The areas that are shaded here in red would be the next kind of two big shapes that I would eliminate. And you'd get the points and everything the same way. This triangulation process continues throughout the course of the drawing. But it's all about biggest shapes to smallest shapes. So always trying to find the biggest pieces of information, the biggest decisions you can make before moving on to anything smaller. Here I am starting to chip away at a little bit of a smaller piece. This is still on the outside contour of our drawing here. But at this stage, we can start to even find the big information within the form. So that could mean like where the toes engage on the pedestal on the ground plane there, what that angle looks like, what the angle of the toes are at. That's the sort of information we're going to get into next. We're not really focusing on our secondary volumes, our secondary forms of the actual ankle and foot and the muscles and the bones that are happening there. It's still very much big picture stuff. So now I've subdivided the foot. All of this is happening a little bit faster, and I've sped up the recording here. But I'm going in, and all these decisions, again, I'm triangulating all of these points. Once you start to get into the smaller details, the triangulation becomes easier because your points are a lot closer together. So I'm mapping out the external contour of the ankle here, but I'm using it by crossing over the form, basically from one side of the form to the other side, kind of stitching these things together. As I'm starting to triangulate and map out these secondary forms of the foot, what's really happening is these are arcs. These are really soft curves. But what I'm doing is I'm basically finding the high point of the curve and the low point of the curve. I'm assigning an anchor point to those places, and then I'm connecting them with straight lines. I think it's really smart in the beginning to use straight lines because you can get more accurate with them, and then you can just soften those lines into curves as you go. I'm going to erase my construction lines. And let's look at it without the reference very quickly. All right, so the next thing to do, I would say this is about a stage 2 level of refinement. Stage 3 is basically adding in some of the value information. So we're going to map it out the same way. We're boxing it out, and we're using our triangulating methods to basically find those shapes. But now we're looking into basically what those shadow shapes look like if they were to become another like polygon of some kind. We're dividing the light up into, again, just like in the initial passes of this block into the biggest ideas possible, the biggest concept, which would be light versus dark. So we're not really focusing on halftones or any of the subtle shading that's happening on the form. It's just what's in the light and what's not in the light, and that's where you're going to map out your shadow shapes. Shadow shapes are typically mapped out along what we call the terminator line or the core shadow line, which is that line where basically distinguishes the light side of a form from the shadow side of a form. Okay, so we're going to be doing I want to show you guys what I call point triangulation. This is a 2D approach to drawing, and it's all based on triangulating points, anchor points with angles. So the main thing that we're going to be doing is using our pencil here as our kind of angle measuring device. And we're going to be using our drawing mechanics, drawing with our shoulders, but really it's all about lining up angles. So I use this pencil here as basically aligning this angle, and I will line it up with my reference image here, and I'm using this to take angles of something. And then basically you try to keep your arm as isolated and still as possible. As you come over to your drawing board, you use that same angle and try to draw that angle. So typically what happens, especially when you're beginning, is you're going to get a lot of taking an angle from your reference over here, and as you move, your angle is going to, your arm is going to kind of start moving a little bit, so the angle isn't going to be the same. So over time you're going to be able to have a really isolated motion here, so you're preserving that angle as you're bringing it over to your drawing board. But as you practice, all you really have to do is double check all the marks you make. So for instance, I'm taking an angle here for my reference, and what I'm using is this basic kind of this angle here to represent the whole tilt of the side of the foot here. I'm oversimplifying this because what we're really trying to get right now is just an envelope, and to get the envelope we're using point triangulation. So I'm going to grab that angle here, I'm going to move it over here. I'm comparing it to what I have already, and what I'm seeing is that my angle is not quite steep enough. So come in here, adjust that. In the beginning you can use like really kind of broad definitions of what that line is. You know, the line kind of starts here and ends on this side. As we refine this, it's going to become more clear as to what that actual line is, but for now it's just about getting this angle in the ballpark, right? So I'm going to put that angle down on my drawing board, and then I'm going to take the angle of the line that I just made and bring it back to my reference and double check that way. So you can bring it from the reference to the drawing board and back and back and back. You can check over and over as many times as you need to until you get it right. So what I see here is that this angle is pretty good to what I have as my reference here. And at the moment we're just going to go for a basic envelope. That's what we want first. And what I'm thinking about here is just placing the envelope on this page. The envelope's going to be, you know, 5-6 sided, you know, no more than that. It's really just the outside, the extreme points of whatever your reference is, the overall shape of what that fits into. I like to think of it as, or someone's referred to it to me as picturing like if your reference is a model or something and they're posing, it's like they have a rubber band that's going from their foot up to their arm, up to their head, up to their shoulder, down to their hand, right? So it's this like external point-to-point system, as if there was like this rubber band kind of holding their shape in place. So back over to this, we have that first line here. Now with this line we can make the size of this foot whatever we want. You know, I can say the top part of this foot is here and the bottom part is here. It's still going to be on the same line, right? So we have not established a scale yet, and we will be establishing a scale once we start to add the points in here. So the first thing I like to do is just get an overall angle of something, and then I like to find a point, you know, just for this case I'm going to put it right here. That's going to be the top. That's going to be this point right here. That'll be the top-ish part of this foot cast. Now from there we will take another angle, and this next angle is going to be, I'm actually going to cut straight across this, so I know that there's an angle change here and an angle change there, but what I really want is this big picture envelope, so I'm going to cut straight across from here to that side, so it's like the edges of this ellipse that the ankle is making. So with this being that point, I'm going to take my next angle measurement is going to be from here down to that. See that? I'm going to ghost in my best guess of what the measurement is that I just made, and then I will check it. That's pretty close. So even now I have an established scale, so I can make the top of this ankle this wide if I want, all the way out to here. You know, it's going to mean the foot itself is going to fall off of this page. So you have to keep that in mind as you're developing this, and that's what is really strong about getting an envelope, is it will tell you right away if your subject is going to fall off the page somewhere. So I'm going to put this other point here. And this, so far, has been arbitrary. You know, this point I could have put anywhere on this line, and this point I could have put anywhere on this line, as long as this line is coming out of this point. So, but once you land that second anchor point, then you can't make arbitrary decisions anymore. You have to really look and measure everything against itself. So the next mark I'm going to make, I'm actually going to bring this in a little bit further. Put it right there. And I'm going to double check that from my drawing back to my reference now. That looks pretty good. Okay, from this spot, the next angle I'm gonna go for, and you might think this is that next angle, but again, think of the envelope of it. So the next angle is really from this point down to here. It's this angle. So it's really good to be working on your drawing mechanics this whole time, because we're trying to make, with these envelopes, we want to make as straight of a line as possible and as big of a line as possible. So drawing with my shoulder right here, I can get a much straighter and cleaner and light-handed mark here. Now the light-handedness is going to come with a lot of practice and understanding your tools, both your pencils and your papers. But it's all about standing back and drawing with your shoulder to get this. The other thing I want to emphasize here is that you want to draw through these points. You see how I have these first 2 points aren't as important for that. Again, those were my arbitrary points. But from there, I don't know where this line is going to end. I don't know where this next point is going to be. So I'm going to really draw through this, bring it all the way down, because if this point lands somewhere where that line isn't, then I have to, you have to go back and draw that line again and double check everything. So it's better to just draw through all of these points. Okay, so the next decision I need to make is where this was that line that I was just drawing, but I need to figure out where it intersects here. So the way to do that, and this is where the triangulating actually comes from, is now that I have 2 points, I can triangulate where that third point is. Now this line is already trying to triangulate that, right? So let me just double check to make sure that's accurate. That looks pretty good. So the next thing you're going to do, and this is, again, this is why we consider this a two-dimensional approach to drawing, is I'm going to take an angle from here all the way over the form to that point. So this line's going to that point and that line's going to that point. So basically, as long as I get that angle right, wherever this angle crosses, intersects this line, wherever this line crosses that line, is where that anchor point's going to go. So I'm triangulating where that point is. Sometimes if you have a big reference like this, I like to use just a knitting needle. It's a little bit bigger than the pencil, so it can line up those points that are further away a little bit more accurately. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to take that angle and I'm bringing it over, and I'm trying to visually line up where this knitting needle is crossing the line, right? And then I'm going to put a little note there where I think that crossed, and then I'll have to check that several times. This time I'm getting it a little bit higher. Check that again. This time I'll bring it from over here. Okay, so now I'm seeing it here. I'm going to check that one more time. And there's no need to overly obsess about this getting perfect, as long as it's within this area, you know, between like here and here, you're gonna be okay, because we're using really light line work here, and as the drawing develops, all of these things become more and more accurate. So as long as we're in this ballpark, and I'm seeing it right here, I am taking my time to double check and triple check, but as long as every time I'm double checking and triple checking, it's landing right in that general area, then I know I'm on the right track. If I check once and it's there, and then I check again and it's way down here, and then I check again and it's way over here, then something's going on, and it's most likely with my hand not being super steady with holding that angle. But as long as every time I'm checking back from my drawing to the reference, from the reference to the drawing, back and forth several times, as long as it's landing in that general area, I'm happy with that and I can move forward. So we're going to say it's here. Now the next angle the next point I want to make is going to be on this first line we made. I want to make this, right? So there's that angle, and it's basically lining up or ending right here. So I want to find this point next. And I can triangulate that from that point, and I can triangulate that from this point. So now I have 2 points I can check with. Right now, that last point we just found, we really only have this one line to check it against. These 2 points will find this. But now that we have these two, I can double check it with this and with that, right? So let's see where this is standing now. Okay. You also want to keep note of, as you're triangulating this, you can really just look at your needle or your pencil too, and just kind of know that, like, sometimes you get verticals and sometimes you get horizontals, and sometimes you get things that are close to that. So like as I'm checking this line, I'm noting that, oh, this feels pretty much like a horizontal to me. It's probably not quite a horizontal, but it's close. So I'm just keeping that in my head, so I know that it's not like, I'm not taking this angle that's clearly here, and as it comes over to my drawing, it's this way now, right? So I'm noting, in general, this is from upper left to lower right. Okay, so that's my guess now based on that first angle measurement I took. I will cross-reference that with this, and I'm seeing it as not quite the same, so I'll double check that. Okay, that time it was closer, so now I'll do it again. That time was closer, so I'm going to bring it from my drawing over to the reference to see if that changes anything. No, that's pretty good. Use this bottom one more time. From the drawing to the reference. Pretty good. Okay, so we're going to stick with this. So that's this point and this point. So we still have this, we have to find this point and that point. And then I'm happy with that being the overall envelope of this. So, based on this isn't quite, I'm just going to draw this in because it's close to a vertical. It's a little bit off. Again, I'm drawing through this. As you practice this more and more, and you become more comfortable with seeing these angles, and more experienced with seeing and recording these angles, you can actually do a lot of this in your head. But when you're starting, you should always be measuring and double checking and triple checking. But as as you start to train your eye, you can start to really get close in the ballpark with just just looking at that and looking at these proportions and being able to hit it pretty closely. So that's my guess there. Let's check it against the opposite side. It's pretty close. Looks like it's up just a little bit. And I will check it against the other side of the ankle too, just for good measure. Alright, that works. Now, same thing here. I'm just going to try my hand at that angle and then check it. It's a little bit steep. So this is why you want to be light-handed. You know, you're going to get the angle wrong a couple times before you get it right. So you want to make sure you're not putting down really dark, unerasable marks that are just going to confuse you throughout the course of the drawing. Alright, now there's an angle change from here out. So this is the last point that I'm trying to find is right here. Okay, so let's take a measurement from this one. That's our easiest one. That's the one that actually structurally runs into this angle. Boom. I'm seeing it right around here. See, what I'm doing is I'm taking this angle from my drawing, or from my reference, bringing it to the drawing, and checking it. I'm not actually going up to the paper and lining this up, and then making, you know, a really straight line there. I'm just visually lining it up. That lines up. I'm going to throw this in here, and then I will double check. I'm going to double check it with the opposite top corner of the ankle. So you really don't want to move forward until all of these points are relating correctly to each other. Especially once you close your envelope, you'll start to, that's like a crucial time to make sure everything relates with each other. So what I'm seeing now is that this, from this point down, is landing somewhere more around there. So let's check that a couple times. Yep, that's where that is. I'm actually seeing it. This line is also informing that it's more over there. Check it again with that top left part of the ankle. Yeah, all signs are pointing to this over this. So then I have to go back and say, what the heck? Oh. What the heck happened? Yeah. So that initial mark was just wrong. You know, this is why we double check. So I'm going to go in and erase this old one just to be safe. You don't have to erase everything you do as you go. You know, these lines are kind of my structural block-in, triangulating lines. They won't exist in the end drawing, but you don't have to necessarily go and erase them. As long as you're being light-handed, you can erase them as the drawing develops. So I'm going to go around and triangulate all of these one more time. Okay. So this is the envelope stage right here. Next I want to show you that like first level refinement. Okay, so it's really about, from here we're going to try to carve out the next biggest shape out of the empty space, right? So for me, I'm seeing this as being that next big shape to cut out. So that's what I'm going to go for. This way. So just me visually analyzing this next angle as it's slightly tipped up from, it starts lower on the left and a little bit higher on the right. Not by much, but by a little bit. So then the next biggest kind of angle change is right here. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go for, and it looks like it's almost directly above the point that we have. It's just a little bit off to the side. Okay, that'll work. So again, there's all sorts of tiny little volumes that are happening within this, but we want to make the biggest decisions possible, the biggest, we want to carve out the next biggest shape with us in the most efficient way. So what that is for me is I'm going to, I'm going to keep, this is where it becomes kind of personal preference. There's not one correct way to do this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go from this point to this point, and it's going to affect this just slightly. And these are things I'm keeping in my head because the same things up here, I connected there to there. There's a little bit of form on top of that. So as we develop this, you have to keep those things in mind. So this one's nice because I already have this point here. So I can just draw this in, again, trying to get a nice straight, ghosty line. I'm going to check that. Alright, that'll work. Alright, the next biggest line that I want to shave out here is this little triangle here. So they end up being a lot of triangles that you're working with. Okay, so I took a guess at what that angle is. Not quite there. Now this ankle here, just knowing that there's more there. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. It's just getting in the ballpark that we're going for right now. Happy with that being carved out now. That's pretty rough. There's this whole area needs more to be developed. But for now, that's good, because if I start working at these tiny little angles within this little section, you have to zoom out and realize that you're not working at that level of detail anywhere else on this block end. So you want to develop this whole drawing evenly. So if I'm working really small over here, that means that should be telling you that this whole drawing is ready for that level of refinement, which it clearly is not. This is still just trying to land everything in the ballpark. So this for me is good enough. Now I'm going to come up here. I'm going to add that top part of the ankle, because I think it's important to have a sense of that form up there. Feels pretty good. Now where the angle overlaps is here-ish. I'll double check that. That's pretty close. Okay, and then I'm going to add this ankle bone here. It's a pretty big event within this side, you know, within this angle. This is the biggest kind of protrusion. So let's see. First thing, let's get a sense of the actual, right, because this angle here was representing that. So even this top part of the ankle itself is coming in quite a bit more. Okay, so now this is, you know, kind of like a slow arc here, but if you were to break that down into just lines and angles, then I would say that's about here where there's an angle change. And I'm going to triangulate that based on this point. You have to really be patient to get the satisfaction of the thing starting to look like something. It really does kind of start to emerge in front of your own eyes without you realizing you're doing anything. And if that is a feeling that you have, then it means that you're doing this right, because otherwise you're kind of drawing based on symbols. You know, you're drawing what you think a foot is, or what you think an ankle is, what you think the toe is, and you're not actually taking the time to see what's visually happening in front of you. So it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter what you're drawing, whether it's a foot or a bird or a tree or a figure or a chair or a car or any of that. It's all the same, like, process. I think it's okay to start to feel some of the gestural qualities within this exercise, within the block and the triangulation envelope exercise. You know, like I can really feel a nice curve from this top part of the ankle through the ankle bone here and down into the base of the foot down here. There's a nice kind of sweeping arc. Make sure that you're relating it still. So a level 2 refinement, I would say, is once you start to realize some of the internal forms, so we're not just dealing with this contour anymore. There's still some really simplified aspects to the contour, but we're also starting to develop inside of the shape on a very simplified level. Okay, now I'm going to refine this side just a little bit more here. And I can use internal triangulating to find basically the high points and the low points of these smoother kind of curves that are happening here. There's still a high point of this curve and a low point of that curve. So that's what I'm hunting out, and I'm turning them into straight lines and points. Okay, so this is where I would say is a good kind of stage 2 refinement here. So I'm getting the contour, I'm getting more of the form kind of mapped out. You could start to map out some of the shadow information. So for instance, we're going to block in the shadow just like anything else. And we can triangulate this too. Again, it doesn't matter if it's shadow or not shadow. It's all a two-dimensional information. And when you're mapping your shadow shapes and massing in your shadow shapes, don't even really think about values. You just want a solid wash of a darker value to indicate the shadow shapes. Alright, we're going to go a little bit further here and start start to refine this out even more. So my pencil is freshly sharpened. I'm going to return to this base here. I'm kind of scanning the whole drawing and trying to jump around as much as I can to just check everything the second time. So I'm just solidifying, that last phase, I guess you would say the second phase of refinement. I'm solidifying some of the structure, some of the masses, but now within this third phase, I'm actually refining some of the edge work and getting these lines to be a little bit more specific to what's up on the reference. And because I've done all that early stage kind of heavy lifting with this, I can start to just follow these lines looking at my reference. So this is the stage that I'm emphasizing more. Some of those arcs, like I mentioned earlier, now I'm starting to feel those within the context of the points that I've mapped out. And maybe I'll go ahead and I'll erase some of those. Some of those construction lines. Get rid of those so you can see kind of where we're going to leave it. So this is what I would call close to, roughly a stage 3 refinement. There could be maybe a little bit more sense of value within this at this stage, but I would argue that this is pretty close to like a stage 3 refinement. If there was more value, it'd be really about giving this whole thing a little bit of a wash here. And then pulling out highlights where we see them. To indicate the light side, just how we've kind of blocked in the shadow side of things. But again, I think that's a little dangerous. That's getting more into values than it is really about what we're trying to do here is block-ins. So I think this is probably a good spot to leave it on a level 3 refinement.